Why is Gen Z so Puritan? Why do they all go to the club dressed like Little House on the Prairie, if they even go to the club at all? It could be because of a little theory called the hemline index. Hello girlies, class has begun. My name is Nikita, aka head professor at Bimbo University. Today we're going to be looking at how the economy impacts personal style and the culture around us.
And it's sort of comical how you think that you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry.
Two things to remember. The hemline index is just a theory. It holds up sometimes, but it doesn't hold up all the time. Like looking at a gray sky and predicting rain. And finally, there's no way that I or anyone else can make a sweeping generalization about Gen Z or any other generation in history. In 2023, the population of Gen Z was 69 million. Nice. There's no way that many people all act the same. So if you're like, I'm Gen Z and I don't dress or act like that, I believe you. This video will also primarily focus on women's fashion. So with that, let's get started. To begin, what is the hemline index? It's a theory that states skirts get shorter as the economy gets better, and skirts get longer when the economy is not doing well. This theory gained steam in the 1920s when economist George Taylor was wondering, why are the girlies buying so much hosiery? He attributed it to when skirts are short, the girlies want to show off their stockings. Side note, why was he wondering about any of that? Now, George Taylor never said that skirt length had anything to do with the economy, but over time, that's what the theory evolved to mean, especially when you look at the 1920s. Women in the 1920s just got the right to vote if you're white. They had just tasted economic freedom from working in men's jobs while the men were off fighting in World War I. I don't know about y'all, but when my paycheck hits, I'm buying shots for the table. I'm taking the girlies out. Like, money is being spent. And that was the vibe of the 20s. This is when women's skirts became the shortest they had ever been. The dresses were loose, they allowed for dancing, the outfits were glittery, and they expressed individuality. What was happening during the 1920s? Well, the US economy had grown by 40%. Cars had become accessible to the middle class, and it caused a boom in the hotel and travel industry. People were excited to be alive after going through a world war and a pandemic, so they were spending money. So the girlies were not only wearing short dresses, but they were wearing bold makeup. Because when the economy is good and you got money in the pocket and you're not afraid to lose your job, you're taking more risks. Fashion becomes a tool for self-expression and not survival. Not every woman was on board with this way of dressing. Some found it way too risque. Feminists who had just fought for the right to vote were like, girls, you guys are taking it a bit too far. They're gonna take the right away from us again. Like, tone it down. But 100 years later, who do you remember? The flappers or the haters? Quiz time if you've watched my videos before. Who are the flappers a direct response to? The Gibson girl, and we're gonna go over why that matters. So the Gibson girl was the reigning aesthetic of the 1890s to the 1910s. Now we have TikTok today, so trends move fast, but before TikTok, they weren't moving that fast. The Gibson girl was the aesthetic from 1890s to 1910s. Can you imagine if Barbiecore lasted 20 years? I can. The Gibson girl was an elegant old money look. She had a cinched waist, wore long dresses with high necklines, whereas the flappers dressed in like loose, boyish dresses. The Gibson girl was very feminine, although the outfit was a lot more tighter and restrictive. Can you guess what the vibe of the 1890s was? Interesting, the Panic of 1893, a seriously bad economic time in the history of the US. Now, in the mid-1800s, the railroad guys were like the tech people of our time. Carnegie, JP Morgan, Rockefeller, they were like the Bezos and Zuckerberg of their time. So these railroad guys balled out a little too hard, bet too much money on railroads, and the bubble burst. So the economy went down, they lost all that money, it was bad. Unemployment is high, people don't have that much money, and that trickles down into fashion choices. When times are uncertain, you opt for certainty. You dress in toned down colors and don't draw too much attention to yourself. So the 1920s, good economy, short skirts. In 1929, in the stock market crash, hemlines get longer again. Fashion mimics the Gibson girls, cinched waist with an hourglass figure and long dresses and skirts. Since unemployment is extremely high, women trade their party girl independent lifestyle for the safety of marriage. I mean, they were kind of forced into it too. Being with a man is safe. He doesn't face wage gap discrimination. There's no sexism in the office. Women were being also pushed out of their jobs to make room for men who felt it was their right to be working. So there was an emphasis on gender roles. Another reason why the culture gets more conservative when the economy is bad is because when times are tough, people turn to religion. And we all know God hates it when the girlies have fun. Actually, that's a lie. If God really hated it, would he have invented the But, alright, back to class. But it wasn't all depressing during the Great Depression. Whimsical patterns like polka dots and florals got popular around this time, giving people a sense of joy and hope to hold on to and make it through. So you might be thinking, the hemline index makes no sense. Why wouldn't short skirts be popular when the economy is bad? Because they take less material to make. And to that I say, fashion just isn't about the cost. It's also about expressing a certain message about yourself. It's about social status. It's about a lot of things. As we transition to the next decade, you'll start to see the hemline index not necessarily applying. The Great Depression ends in 1939 as Americans gear up to fight World War II. Now, the economy does technically get better here. America shifts into wartime production and makes and sells a lot of weapons. Nearly everyone has a job because everyone's helping out with the war effort. But is it a good time like the 1920s? No! In the 1940s, the hemlines do get shorter, but this is more because of government restrictions on materials. See, everything is rationed because of the war. Women went back to work during World War II, and their outfits had to be practical and allow for movement, which is why skirts got shorter as well. The outfits were short and boyish because they had to be one of the boys. The war ends in 1945, and people have so much trauma from it. The way we don't want to be reminded of COVID, people did not want to be reminded of the war in any way. In 1947, Christian Dior introduces the new look on women. Instead of ugly wartime short skirts, we are back to the ultra feminine, long full skirt, cinched waist. In the late 40s, everyone rushed to buy all the things that they couldn't get during the war, which made inflation go up and have a subsequent recession. Interesting. Now we enter the 1950s, MAGA's favorite era. Why? Because the economy was good and women weren't in the workforce. Today's trad wife, specifically ones that say stuff like this, will say the 1950s were the ideal time, where women were women and men were men. Well, did you know a lot of women were actually very satisfied in their jobs, but when World War II ended, all of the men returned home and they wanted their jobs back. So they pushed the women out of the workforce by shaming women who worked and putting ads everywhere that a woman's true place is at home. So I hope that any woman who's nostalgic for the 1950s knows that while you get to make the choice to stay home, women in the 1950s didn't. It wasn't natural at all. So the war ends and causes an increase in consumer spending, which is great for the economy. The economy grew by 37% in the 50s, yet Dior's new look stays relevant until the mid-50s. Style did get bold and experimental and expressive of individuality while still covering up and looking conservative. The deprivation of World War II brought a hunger for luxury and dressing up. Women were always expected to be dolled up and accessorized. Now, an interesting thing happened in the 50s. Fashion no longer catered to women and men. A new market emerges called teenagers. Now, teenagers weren't a thing for like most of history. Once you hit puberty, you were off to the farms. You were working. You were getting that paycheck for your family. That's why people had kids. But because of the war, 13 to 18-year-olds were stuck at home and dependent on their parents. And that created a new stage of development called teenagers. It's like something similar we're seeing today with the 20s being an extension of adolescence rather than full-fledged adulthood. The economy and the cost of living has gone up so much that a lot of people our age, a lot of people in their 20s live at home. If you're in your 20s right now, you probably have a lot in common and are feeling the same complicated feelings as a 16-year-old in the 40s. Now the 1960s. The 1960s were economically that girl. In 1961, America got a hot president, JFK. When America has a hot president, the vibes are just better. I don't make the rules. Not only was there rapid economic growth, but there was government help in dealing with poverty. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson vowed to develop a program that would give poor people a hand up, not a hand out. The space race was ramping up, which led to a lot of new tech jobs and excitement about the future. Can you imagine thinking about the future and not feeling dread? Well, that's what the boomers got. Speaking of boomers, why are they called that? Oh, because of the baby boom that happened at the end of World War II, which means in the 1960s, boomers were teens and in their 20s. In fact, in the mid-60s, 40% of the UK population was under 25 years old. Youth culture ruled, young people dominated, and because families had disposable income, teens had real purchasing power. So fashion began to cater to young people for the first time. And in true nature of the hemline index, in the 60s, we get the miniskirt. I got a comment on my short video about the hemline index with someone saying, oh, so when the economy is better, women automatically dress inappropriately? And it's like, no. A short hemline being inappropriate is something a man came up with. The miniskirt, popularized by Mary Quant, wasn't supposed to be sexy and show legs. As Quant put it, women should be able to run and catch the bus. So in that way, the miniskirt was the uniform of women's liberation. In the 1960s, the FDA approved the birth control pill, which also opened up a new freedom for women. Designs also got really bold here with geometric and futuristic patterns inspired by the space race. I should just stop this video right here because by now you guys understand that when the economy is good, you're not only physically liberated, but you have the chance to explore your creativity. You know when Eminem said that line about how the best living rapper in the world is probably working a double at Burger King right now? That is the whole point. When people are focused on their survival, there's no chance to explore their talents, there's no chance to explore creativity, and there's no chance to find out who you are as a person. Seriously makes society so lame. The late 60s also saw social upheaval. People were pissed at the system. This is another reason skirts got shorter, because the 60s saw women's liberation, it saw anti-war protests, civil rights movement. There was a spirit of rebellion in the air, and all these long skirts did was cage women. Now we get to the 1970s, where the economy, not so hot. The Vietnam War created budget deficits and inflation, and for this first time we see stagflation, which means high inflation and no economic growth. It gets worse. Nixon ended the gold standard, which meant the US dollar was no longer backed by gold. Now, I won't get too deep into this, but what it does mean is now the US dollar could fluctuate with supply and demand, and it's a lot more volatile. And this is what really takes the cake. OPEC, the coalition of oil-producing countries, stopped exporting oil to the U.S. because of their support for Israel. Because of this, gas prices skyrocket in the U.S. This affects everything, because gas prices isn't just about filling up your own car with gas. It's about the truck that transports food to grocery stores. Gas prices affect a lot of things. Coincidentally, in the 70s, the midi skirt arrives. The futuristic and youthful styles of the 1960s evolved to earthy and more practical clothing. Clothing that can go with everything, not just a one-time outfit. The midi skirt is really pushed by designers in the 70s. This is about the time where we start to see the cracks in the hemline index. Because of women's liberation, women are not so tied to the societal and fashion expectations of them, so they start to rebel against fashion standards and the restrictiveness of the long skirt. Anti-fashion began a thing in the 1970s, sewing your own clothes, punk styles with safety pins popping out. Culture really starts to fragment here. Because of the economy was so bad in the 70s, who do people always blame? The government. And because now people have lost trust in the government, they also lose trust in government programs. In the 80s, Reagan becomes president and really enforces capitalism, cuts a ton of government programs because they're a waste of money. The economy gets better, but not equally. The rich get richer and money becomes kind of a status symbol. 80s fashion was all about excess, all about going big or going home, because you want to show off that you can afford a lot. Or at least make it look like you can. The earthy, subtle minimalism of the 70s was officially dead. Miniskirts returned thanks to pop culture icons like Madonna and Tina Turner. Yet because Reagan was president, there was still an air of conservatism. Like today's Pilates craze, everyone in the 80s was into aerobics. Athleisure became big at this time. But whereas everyone in the gym today is kind of wearing the same black aloe yoga set, bold colors were really prominent in this area. The early 90s saw a recession at the beginning, where hemline were indeed longer, compared to the mid-90s, which saw short skirts and those lacy slip dresses. But overall, the 1990s is where culture starts to fragment, and we start following tastemakers such as 90s supermodels. Their individual personalities really influenced a lot of style. Subcultures like grunge, hip-hop, to loud teen girl fashion had evolved, and nobody was following just one rule. Now the 2000s, like the railroad boom in the 1800s, the dot-com boom saw investors throwing a ton of money at tech startups. Spoiler, it didn't work, and the bubble burst. God, will we ever learn? Still, the tech boom and the new baby internet really saw a burst of youthful energy in fashion. Skin was out, belly button rings were everywhere, torsos were everywhere. Even though the dot-com bubble burst, Even though 9/11 created a culture of fear and patriotism, fashion in this era was still very fun and pretty and bright and campy. It wasn't until the 2008 recession that we see juicy tracksuits being traded in for plain white tees and jeans. 2010's fashion at the beginning was cautious. People were still reeling from the recession, so fashion wasn't as risky. This is when millennials were wearing business casual to the club. This is when every song on the radio talked about tonight, tonight. Phones were pretty minimal in our lives, meaning we could truly disconnect from our suffering, whereas today you're constantly reminded of it. Point being that times were tough. Be fun, but also be practical. In the early 2010s, kind of like we have today, there was a principle of having fewer clothes of better quality. That all kind of changes around 2012 when the economy starts to get good. Big tech explodes. Everyone's getting iPhones, everyone's got social media, everyone's got Netflix. Startups like Uber and Airbnb are going so mainstream, and it really inspires people. So the fashion of the mid-2010s was like a bit more daring. Also, this is around the time that like H&M and Forever 21 was just like so popular. Fast fashion really was taking off here. I owned so many crop tops. Makeup was more bold, but before you romanticize this era too much, this is when the curated nest of Instagram really starts to rear its head. Fashion becomes very curated, very filtered, very edited. Fashion in the 2020s does have an emphasis on neutrals and nothing too crazy. And it is kind of because of conservatism, yes, but it's also because of COVID. During COVID, people weren't at home. They were chilling in their sweats, and that sort of leisurely fashion still exists today. A lot of people work from home, so they're just wearing those clothes. People don't go out as much as they used to, so they're kind of still in that comfortable attire. But it's no secret that in 2020s there is a uniformity. It seems like everyone has Instagram face. It seems like neutrals are really dominant in fashion. Look at this email that I got from Aritzia today. And the culture has really shifted to conservatism. The hemline index is absolutely at play here. When there is uncertainty in the world, there is a human need to search for certainty. What's more certainty than tradition and predictability? That could be your capsule wardrobe. In the 2020s, we're also environmentally conscious. We're not playing around with fashion as much because it's costing the earth. But hey, there's good news. The democratization of the fashion industry with the reseller market, thrift stores, buying secondhand, going to clothing swaps, we get to make our own trends and dress ourselves as an act of rebellion. A new market has been created by our peers and by us with all the hemlines from the past. In summary, the hemline index is a useful tool to look at markets, but don't go buying a bunch of stocks just because you saw some girlies in miniskirts. But it's clear that fashion and culture don't exist in a vacuum. You may think that you're making your own decisions, but they are undeniably influenced by those around you or those before you. So maybe, just maybe, the true finance bros were the fashion girlies all along. Looks like class is over, but as always, I'm keeping you after the bell. Just for fun, here are some other indicators of the economy. The lipstick index. When the economy is worse, beauty product sales go up. This is because people can't afford larger luxuries, so they buy affordable pick-me-ups to keep them going. The skyscraper index. The theory that skyscrapers completing their construction is a sign of a recession, meaning that tall buildings get built during booms while there is money. But just as money becomes uncertain, skyscrapers rush to get completed or they're just delayed. The Empire State Building was completed in the beginning of the Great Depression, and the Burj Khalifa in Dubai announced its completion in 2009. Men's underwear and cargo shorts. In a bad economy, men's underwear sales go down while the sale of cargo shorts go up. The law school index. During hard times, applications to law school spike as people seek a reliable and stable job. Finally, the hanging out with my friends index, because when times are bad, you should hang out with your friends more. That's just the one I made up right now. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching. I hope you walk out of this learning 2 things. 1, fashion is a personal choice and a form of self-expression. 2, fashion is not a personal choice, and you are responding to everyone else, even in your rebellion. But let that bring you comfort because there are no rules. Make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps the algorithm. Also, comment and share. That helps even more. Bye. I love you. Is it inappropriate for a teacher to say I love you? Whatever. There's no rules.